I thought we'd get back to work on our grill project that we started on the other day, and we've already forged our top and bottom rails. These are the bars that the verticals are going to attach to, and these have to have a way to mount to the building. The way those will mount to the building is with a flattened out area in the bar that's big enough to put a bolt hole in. And that way we can bolt these to the building. And this area I refer to as a finial. A finial is just the way you treat the end of a bar to make it something other than just a cutout bar. And finials can be on hinges, they can be on various hardware items, and the ends of bars like this. A lot of times the bars for a gate or rail will stick up above the support structure, and it'll need a finial on there. So there are lots of different kinds of finials. I decided to go with this classic spade or spear shape, but we'll talk about some other finial shapes as we get onto this. We have 4 different ends on these rails that we have to do. And I thought about doing a different finial on all 4 ends, but I really decided that that's not what I wanted on the finished product. So we will do the test or sample finials on scrap bar that we can then save, and I'll hang them on the wall and they'll stay in the shop for future reference. If a customer wants to look at finial possibilities, then I'll have those, and if I do those first I can choose, but I've done all these finials before, so I kind of knew what I wanted, so that's why I went with the spade end. But we'll also do a bean end, a round end, and a fishtail end, and I'll draw those out for you real quick so you know what I'm talking about. These are all really fairly classic elements that you find in all sorts of different ironwork. A spade, think just like a deck of cards. A spade on a deck of cards, same thing. Something like that. A round would have the same bar, but it would just be a round end. That's easy enough. Both of these would get bolt holes. A bean is similar to the round end. But it's kidney bean shaped, and it can be just oval like that, and sometimes it looks pretty good if it kind of dips. It's a little bit more bean shape in here. It's a little bit more work, and it's going to require some filing after the fact to get this to look just right, and some fiddling to, even in forging, to get this shape just what you want. But I also think it's okay to come back and grind those if you need to. And the other one that I'm going to do is really probably the simplest and the easiest to do. It's just going to take the bar and we're just going to flare it out and thin it at the end so it has kind of a fishtail shape to it. And that was my original thought for this, but I decided to go with the spade style finial here. Why I decided that, I don't know. If I was doing this tomorrow, I might decide something different. So let's go to the anvil and let's make one of each of these, and we will do the spade on the other end of this bar. But before we do that, these all come out relatively the same. I want to make sure all of my ends are the same. So I'm going to measure from some known point. I have about 2 1/4 inches there, 2 3/4 there, and the other end about 3 inches. So 2 1/4 is what I want to make all these. And then I'm going to want to cut these off. I'll just cut these off with the chop saw. But if these aren't all the same, my finials won't look all the same. So I want to make sure those are trimmed in the same length to start with. So I got all my ends trimmed to the same length. I'm going to put that in the fire and get it hot. The first step is just to put a blunt point on this. We need to set this up so that when we forge it, it wants to be the shape that we are looking for. Just starting to thin this out and then trying to put that point on doesn't work very well because it's too thin at that time. So let's do the point first. Because of that 90-degree bend, you may have to jump around from one side of the anvil to the other a little bit. not a big deal. Try and keep your bend looking good. You can unbend that a little bit at this point and you might screw things up, so keep that in control as you put your point on. So that's all we need is a little point. Now we're going to hang the bar down so that this is the side that mounts to the building is up, and we're going to put about half of that bar on the anvil and use half face blows and create a little step down. Now typically I would do almost all of this in one heat, but it's hard to talk about it and forge it. So you can see we're starting to get a step, and that gives us a way we can kind of index this on the anvil. Then we're going to peen this and widen it out. So we'll line our little step we created up, and we're going to start right in the middle with the peen. And we're still doing essentially half-faced blows, but we're staying in the center until we get it fairly thin right in the middle. Then we're going to work our way to one end, or one side, with the peen of the hammer. And we'll need to get that hot, but you can see the shape is starting to show up there. And peen the area you want to spread the most. You may have to turn this a little side to side and kind of work in this area. And at some point you'll probably want to go back to the flat of the hammer to clean it up. And you may need to draw out here just a little. That gets really difficult, and if you do all this just right, you won't need to do that. Now I've set a pair of dividers the same width as the finial on the other end, and this isn't quite as wide, so I'm going to do a little bit more. I think I'm pretty happy with that. Here's my dividers. So that comes out the same as one on the other end. And you could use a hook rule for that. You know, if you want to use a measurement, you can use the graduated hook ruler we've looked at before. And it's about 2 inches. Or you could just mark a regular hook rule. You could even make a mark on the anvil somewhere and say it's between these two soapstone marks is what I want, and then just compare every one of them to those marks. Lots of ways to compare these, but you want to try and make all of these the same, which means you need to step off the same amount each time, ideally. You know, if they're a little off, that's not going to matter. I just do it by eye. I think that's going to be just fine for this project. So that's one kind of finial, and that's going to need some refinement, and we'll do all that after they all cool. I'm going to take this little piece of scrap here, and we're just going to do the little fishtail finial. This is quite easy. It's just a matter of spreading it out. I'm not going to put a step down in it. Now that starts to curve. If you like the curve, great. If you don't, peen the corners out with your cross peen and get it straight before you do too much more. This will be a lot easier and a longer scrap bar, but you can see we're starting to get the flare we want. Now I'm just going to go to the face of the hammer and taper that out. Kind of work on the corner that needs it the most. And you can kind of work back a little bit and try and clean up that end, but I think filing is fair game. Now remember, this for our grill has to sit flat, so I'm making this flat across the back and not an even taper. But that's really all you need for that. Maybe put a little bevel around the edge for decorative purposes. Very simple little element, and would look very good on that grill, I think. So let's do the round one. I'm not going to set this up, at least not initially. I'll do that after I create my step. So I'm going to leave a little bit more than 5/8 on there, maybe 3/4. And I'm going to start to spread this. However, I don't want to go too far because this is going to end up as a square. But now that I've got a little bit of a swell I can hook over the anvil, I can start to round this up. And that's going to be easier to make a round. And you could just use that much of it if you didn't need any bigger. But I want this to be a little bit bigger. I'm not going to use the peen because I want it to spread evenly, so I'm just going to straight down to the face. And now that I see it's going to stretch, I'll go to the peen and widen it out to try and keep it even, and then back to the face. I'm going to rotate it a little bit so I can get the corners down. And if you need to, you can refine it a little bit here, but you can't do too much because it's going to want to fold over. There's a nice little round finial that would make an ideal place to mount that on the building, use on our grill. So let's do a bean. I'm going to do that on the other end of the same bar because this bar was long enough. Now the bean end starts exactly like the round end did. I'm going to set off about 3/4 or so, create my step, except here I'm going to want to widen it a little bit more because it's a wide element, not a symmetrically round element. I still want to knock these corners off, but then I am going to go to the peen here, and just like the spade, start in the center, work your way one way, back to the center, work your way the other way. I'm going to continue to peen this a little bit and try and get more of a shoulder I can work on to round this. But by using the peen and spreading it, I can end up with a much wider oval shape. Now you'll see me turning this. That's just to try and get this edge up on the anvil where I can work it. And you may go back and forth a little bit, but as this gets thinner, it doesn't really want to do that very well. And for the grill project, we don't want to make these too thin. If this was going to be a door handle, that can be fairly thin because it doesn't get much stress. But a grill that's supposed to provide security, these need to be fairly heavy. So that's a bean shape. I think we'll do a little filing on that to make it look a little bit more graceful. Now this finial would be fine just the way it is if you like it that shape, but I want to refine it a little bit. This is spread out a little bit right up in here, and I want to crisp that up a little bit and just smooth these lines up. It's not absolutely necessary, but I think I'll like it a little bit more if I do that. So I'm going to put it in the vise. Remember, when you're filing on the push stroke. I usually leave the file in contact so you hear it drag back, but I don't push down on it. And that may wear my files out a little faster, but I find that I keep in control more instead of doing this all the time. But I'm only trying to cut on the push stroke. I'm not trying to cut on the back stroke. That's a square file. I'm going to go to a big half round to clean this up. And I'm also going to file a bevel in here. And that's just ornamental, not absolutely required. I'm going to do all the same stuff on the other side. Now notice this finial does not lay perfectly flat, so I'm going to need to fix that. Go back to the forge and work on that a little bit. Even when you think you're done with a piece, it pays to keep evaluating it and go back and fix stuff if you still can. But I like the shape of that finial pretty well. Now it also would have been smart to punch these holes hot while I had it at the anvil. And I might go back and do that, but you could also drill those. And we'll see where we go with that. Now most of the other finials that we worked on clean up about the same. I'm going to do something a little bit different with the bean because I like the bean to kind of droop down this way. It'll make more sense after I file it. But to do that, just put the piece upright in the vise. And you could use an angle grinder, belt grinder, whatever you've got that you're comfortable using. But a file for this is probably, I think, is the best. And it's not that slow. But I'm going to use a file kind of like a hacksaw here. And I'm just going to cut straight down. The flat of the half-round file is up against here, so I got a sharp edge right at the corner. I'm going to go down about 1/4 of an inch. On both sides. And then I'm going to take the flat and I'm going to put it against the outside of the notch and I'm going to roll over it. I don't want that a sharp pointy droop, but you can see that's a nicer look there. There's a little bit more work I can do to that. And again, filing a bevel on it I think looks good. Yep, that helps. Whatever it takes to get in there and get the shape you want. What I'm doing here, let me see if I can turn this around and work backwards. I'm putting the file in at an angle, so I'm kind of doing a little file cut at a slope here. I'm not cutting all the way through. And that helps you with that bevel, but it helps clean up that edge quite a bit. And I think that makes that look a lot better here. So we'll do the same thing to this other side. Let me see if I can do that so you can see it. It's an awkward body position to file in. So I think that's a much better looking little kidney bean. And again, you could hot punch the hole, drill the hole, whatever it takes. So here are different finials. This is the way it looks on the crossbar. Try and find one that's looks like both ends of this need to be flattened. I didn't get this perfectly flat. It's flat here to here, but I'd like to get this part to lay flat as well. So that definitely goes back to the fire for just a little bit of adjustment. But that's really all we need to do for a finial, other than drilling the hole. And here are my samples. Now these samples are something I encourage you to do. You get experience doing different things, but you can see which one you want to use. You may not want to use the same one I used, and there are probably 100 other options out there. If you use your imagination, look online, look in books, you can see other finial shapes and figure out how to forge those. These are just some of the more simple shapes. But I've now cut all these off. I'm going to drill holes in all these. They'll all be about the same length that way. And I'll put a ring on them so that they can hang on the wall somewhere. And I'll have these to show customers if I ever need to show a customer some options for a finial. So that's it for the finial ends. I had thought that I would do the holes and everything as part of this same video, but I want to discuss laying out holes and doing a test piece for punched holes and slit drifted holes when I do the holes, and I think that might make this video run over. I'm finding that when I hit the 30-minute mark on a video, I end up taking about 5 hours to upload, and that ties up my computer for a long time. A 20-minute video only seems to take about 2 hours. I'm not sure why the big difference, but I'm going to try and keep videos down to more 20 minutes. I have no idea what this one's going to be, but we'll find out. So that's a quick look at some finials. We're doing these for our grill project, but these work for hinges, they work for door handles, they work for latch pieces, pickets for a fence. Don't be limited by the project that we're discussing. These are elements that can be used in a lot of different places. Put them on the end of a coat rack, whatever you want to do. But they're a good thing to practice. These are elements that are good to know how to do. They show up in lots of ironwork. They're very classic, very traditional. So get out to the shop, have fun, challenge your imagination, but make something, develop your skills, stay safe, wear your safety glasses, and we'll see you around on the next one.